Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always by Nick Velato, and we're going to do something a little differently tonight. For those listening the day after or tonight, if you're a night owl or in your morning commute, you will hear it as a normal podcast. We're going live right now on our YouTube, so hopefully some of you will join us live. And like we do with these live shows, we're going to do our recap. We're going to do a full show of our recap for those of you listening on the podcast or who can't make it live. But then we're also going to get to questions from those of you who are here live and are curious about this episode of Giants Hard Knocks, episode 3, which we're recapping, or episode 4 coming up because there's some juicy nuggets in that preview, or anything about the Giants. You can ask us anything about the Giants. You know what I always like to, Nick? Any questions about golf? No, just kidding. You don't have to ask me about golf. I'm joking.
Oh,
joking.
Dan.
You know what that reference is, Nick?
What? No, where's the joke?
I'm joking. It's it's your guy you hate. It's I think you should still leave. It's a skit from the Tim Robinson show.
I don't hate Tim Robinson. I've heard good things about Tim Robinson, and you actually, Dan, to your credit, you've shown me a few clips of him that I was laughing at. The Bachelor part or
the zip line. You're only here
for the zip line. Yeah. I was dying at that. I thought that was so awkward.
You made it obvious you're only here for the zip line, but there's a sketch, Dylan's Burger, that I'm referencing. If you know, you know. But the point being, we got juicy nuggets at the end that we're going to get to. So yeah, ask us about whatever you want, but we want to not do this by just starting off with recapping the preview of the next episode, even though it's very intriguing. We're going to do it in chronological order so we can avoid getting to that first and stay in order. So we open up this episode, Nick, with the Saquon Barkley discussion. And I'll tell you what stood out to me first about this. The first thing is I was thinking in my head, one, do you think Saquon Barkley watches Hard Knocks? My guess would be no. He wants to put this behind him. So I want to ask you, hear your answer on that. And then two, is Joe Schoen just always watching game film? Like no matter where he is, like the big screen, on his computer screen, he had some other game film. This guy's just grinding tape.
I would hope he is. He's a freaking NFL general manager, Dan. If he wasn't, that would be a huge problem. So yeah, but to your point, I love that he's over there grinding film and got on the phone with Ed Berry and Saquon Barkley. Look, I think Saquon Barkley wanted to put the whole New York Giants experiment behind him. I think there was some resentment from last year, as I brought up in a previous episode, and he was just ready to turn the page. And it seems like when it comes down to, as you asked, do I think Saquon Barkley watches Hard Knocks? I don't know, man. I don't know. He seemed to have a chip on his shoulder going into the 2022 season. Remember when he did that podcast and he started cussing and things? We're all like, oh, wow, look at that.
Yes.
I wonder how he feels about all this kind of getting rehashed at this point. I think he has put it behind him. I think he is content being a Philadelphia Eagle. And I really think he's just kind of eager to go towards the season. So I would have to say no if I'm a betting man, but I know nothing about Saquon other than his public persona.
Yeah, I'm same with you. It's mostly just an assumption, but I'll say this. I had the assumption going into this thing, Nick, just some of the vibes I was getting from Saquon and what we saw during the time of this free agency and everything. But I feel even more confident that Saquon may have made his mind up way earlier before any of this happened, because when we got to the point where Joe Schoen was on the phone with his agent and he said, here's the offer, laid it all out, guaranteed money, annual salary. Joe Schoen said, all right, let me talk to my people. And if I come back and say I want to match it, Saquon's going to resign, right? Like in Shane's mind, it's like, well, he said he wanted to retire a Giant. We talked about the Ring of Honor. Matching it is kind of what we always agreed on. Like, you give me your best offer and come back to me. And if we can match it, it's ours. But that didn't sound like the case, because Giants general manager Joe Schoen said he hemmed and hawed. And to me, it kind of sounded like Saquon had already made his mind up, because he would have just been like, yeah, of course, I'll resign if you match it. That was always the plan. And then finally, Nick, I wanted to throw that in. And finally, it was funny to me. Right, I guess the best word isn't funny, but it was odd to me when Joe Schoen finally brought John Mara in. Mara was like, I'm nervous about this because Saquon was our most popular player by far. That was the John Mara quote, our most popular player. And I was wondering, Nick, how many championships have been won in the NFL by accruing the most popular players in the league?
I don't know. I would say 0, probably. Yeah, probably 0. And how many times have the Giants been to the playoffs since 2018? 1. But look, we understand John Mara's love and affection for certain players, and Saquon Barkley is one of those players that he feels very strongly and passionate about. And it sucks for John Mara because it seems like he probably hasn't slept since March.
It definitely seems like he hasn't slept through March. And as we saw from the preview of the next episode, there was whatever he's talking about. He says, we do this deal. And obviously it's the draft episode so we're talking about a trade up. Some people still assume it was for an offensive tackle or receiver for a quarterback. And if he does do that trade, it sounds like John Mara is going to have a legit heart attack. Like he was like, I'm having heart palpitations thinking about doing this deal. So felt like this deal got a lot closer than we were maybe able to let on to believe. And I think that's what's going to be, and we'll get to this at the end of the show. That's going to be interesting to see if the Giants got closer on the trade up for the quarterback than we were led to believe.
That's just way too much change for a guy like John Mara. Imagine losing Saquon Barkley, and then you're going to trade up in a draft to get another quarterback to supplant Daniel Jones. That's just way too much for John Mara. But I found it funny when John Mara was told that Saquon Barkley was going to the Philadelphia Eagles. He just kind of like sat there with a coffee cup that looked like it possibly was like a dip spitting cup or something of that nature. And it was just like, all right. And he like turned around and walked out of the door, and they showed him like walking slowly down the hallway, just kind of sauntering. And I just like picture like the I will remember music in like the background, like slow walking back to his office. John Mara. Yeah. It was a hard one for the old guy to take.
That is epic. That is I think that's one of my favorite bits you've had on this show's history. I just love that right there. Like the Sarah McLachlan, like you see it with the dog, with the pet commercial with the dogs. Will you adopt this dog? Will you make John Hara a happy man? He just lost his favorite, most popular player on the team by far. I love your John Mayer impression too. It's getting better and better. You you hit those deep notes really well. But then we got to what I thought was, well, also one more thing on the Saquon thing before we move past that. We did get to a point that I thought was interesting, where Joe Schoen said, I had heard the Eagles are out on Saquon Barkley. So, and that was just days or maybe moments, at least in the show, moments after he got off the phone with his agent. So, to some extent, Joe Schoen too is getting false information when it comes to maybe draft rumors, free agent rumors, because whatever he heard and whoever he heard that the Eagles were out on Barkley, well, the Eagles ultimately ended up signing Barkley.
Yeah, they ultimately ended up signing Barkley. We got to see Saquon and his family dressed in Eagles garb, and yeah, now it's nothing but history at this point. I think Giants fans were ready to turn the page. One thing about this episode that I did find interesting was we got a little bit of insight on some of the other targets of Joe Schoen and the New York Giants, guys like Robert Hunt, which was to no one's surprise. But if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Hunt signed very early on to the Los Angeles Rams? Was that correct?
Hunt was signed very early in free agency. I don't, was it to the Rams? Did the Rams get Hunt? I don't even remember who got Hunt. I thought it was a lesser team. Why am I thinking a lesser team made the splash for Hunt? Not exactly sure. Let's look this up.
No, it was the Carolina Panthers.
Yes, the Panthers, a lesser team. Yeah, Panthers went hard on Hunt. But on that front, and we're getting now into what I thought was by far and away the most interesting part of the show, that little 10, 15 minutes of, I felt like we were getting rapid fire takeaways when they were planning out free agency. So there's just a lot to unpack, I thought, from the free agency standpoint. But let's start maybe.
We got a good bit here from Jorge Contreras.
Okay, yeah, let's get some comments.
Saquon retweeted the Talking Giants, referencing the Giants not offering him a deal and not matching the Eagles offer. So I'm guessing that he does watch the show, is what Jorge says.
Okay.
Possibly, or he's just aware that could have been in at that time. But yeah, no, I mean, let's stay on the Saquon thing for a little bit. Once it got to the number that it got to, I can't say that I'm surprised at all that Joe Schoen was like, all right, that's a little bit too much. Like north of 25 million guaranteed. That's more money than I would want Joe Schoen to allocate to a running back at that point.
Well, I agree with you. And I know we certainly feel very strongly about that, Nick, but I will say this from their standpoint, we got insight as to why, as we start to unpack the free agency side of this episode, which again was by far the most interesting, probably in my opinion, the best stretch of this Hard Knock season by far. The entire start of that free agent discussion, them going in individual positions, them laying out their big six, which I want to talk about because there were some surprising names on their big six, one especially. But to start, Joe Schoen asked Brian Daboll a simple question. What do we need most? What do you need most? Where do we need to improve most? It's almost like the questions fans ask us, Nick, and the questions we ask each other on this podcast. It was cool. It was almost like listening to a podcast. And Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen had the exact same answer as to what they need to address most on this team to help them get better fastest. Offensive line. Daboll offered a little bit more specific. Interior offensive line, Daboll pointed to. But they said offensive line. And that was the theme of this episode, the theme of their free agency. And the reason why they didn't want to allocate that money to Saquon Barkley, because if you don't allocate that cap space to Barkley, now you can sign multiple free agents to potentially start on your offensive line. That's exactly what the Giants did.
Yeah, and I couldn't be happier for that. It did seem so cavalier, like the conversation. Like Dave's just kind of sits down on the couch, puts his feet up on the table, like, what do you think the biggest need is? What, for the whole team? Yeah. I guess offensive line. It's like, yeah, no shit. That's something we've been talking about for a while. I'm guessing some of that is for the HBO audience, but I'm very glad they were focusing on Robert Hunt and then Runyan and Eluemunor. And those were the three that they were discussing. And they got two of them, right? Eluemunor got bumped up, I think, $1 million. They wanted to get him at 6. They got him at 7 million. And then Runyan, they had to up the guaranteed money because he almost went to the New York Jets. New York Jets sniffing around all the New York Giants guys. They ended up nabbing Tyrod Taylor from the Giants. John Runyan they wanted, and the Giants had to give Runyan an extra year, I believe it was, with a little bit more. I think it was 17 million guaranteed, 10 million APY, right? Yep. Just to draw him away from Aaron Rodgers and Nathaniel Hackett. So I'm glad that Runyan accepted that because, again, he's not the sexiest signing, which I think Judy Batista might have said in the show. And by the way, I'll say this, dude. There were like several sexual innuendos throughout this episode. There was Lieb Schreiber just said something like, well, sex may sell, but it doesn't win games. Well, someone should probably tell that to Patrick Mahomes because that dude's having like his third kid. That guy has like a kid every time he wins the Super Bowl. It's pretty freaking crazy. And then when they signed Devin Singletary, they called it Motorboat. Because his name is Motor. And I thought that was something that was a little odd as well. But funny enough, Dan's not paying attention as he's looking down at his phone. But yeah, man, no, back to what we were talking about. Yeah, I'm glad they got Eluemunor and John Runyan, because if it wasn't for that, I don't really know exactly what would have happened if they also did not land Hunt.
Yeah, that seemed to be their plan. And like you said, the Jets were in at least early on both of them. Late on Runyan, didn't seem to be early on Eluemunor. It seemed like the Giants' main competition at the end of that deal was the Arizona Cardinals, and they were in the mix there. Though I did thought it was interesting. Multiple times, Shane said, quote, Eluemunor is their number one free agent. I didn't know really what he was referencing. I didn't know if he was referencing he was the Raiders' number one free agent, or if
that's what I think.
They, as in the Giants' offensive line coaches and Carmen Brasillo. I didn't know exactly what that meant. I thought it was one of the two. I think it was the former, because I think he would have just said Carms or something like that if he was talking about Brasillo. But or, if he was talking about the collective of Rossetti and all those guys as a they, it might have been them. But I think probably the Raiders, but I don't know exactly who they're for, because they also had Josh Jacobs as a free agent. So that was what part was concerned or confused me a little bit about that whole run. He mentioned that twice with Runyan.
You mean with Eluemunor?
No, I'm with Eluemunor, not Runyan.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I interpreted it as it's the Raiders' number one free agent. But then I was also like, they had to have somebody else. And you just brought up the Jacobs thing, but Jacobs was also on the franchise tag. Maybe they understood that Jacobs wouldn't be back for some reason. But I thought it was that and not the Giants' number one free agent, because just judging by the money, obviously he wasn't, unless they were just trying to get him at that value of $6 million, which there does seem to be some merit to that, because Eluemunor, I think $7 million a year for a player like Eluemunor in today's NFL, a player who can give you relief at right tackle and who can play interior offensive line, is going to start on the offensive line. I think that's kind of a deal, even though he's a little bit older at this point.
I agree with you. Obviously, again, we talked about something on a recent episode that we haven't dropped yet, but we recorded. We want to remain cautiously optimistic about that being the case in the offensive line. But as far as us getting those upgrades, which we still hope to get, but let's just see. But on that front, I did think it was really interesting to hear the Giants discuss not only like why they wanted Eluemunor, but also I misheard it. I thought they said I thought they said with these two guys, we got our starting guard and our starting right guard and right tackle. But what he really said is at Eluemunor, we got either a starting right guard or a starting right tackle.
Yeah.
In which case, we can assume that that's part of the reason we've already seen Eluemunor start off on the right side.
Yeah. So good for the Giants, getting themselves some offensive linemen. We got some appearances too, man, from Ed Triggs, who seemed to be the primary orchestrator of that Eluemunor contract with Josh. It seemed like there were a lot of moving parts to the Giants front office, obviously, but sometimes us as fans, and I'm guilty of this as well, I think it's like always Joe Shane on the phone. Like Ed Triggs was the one handling that whole Jermaine or Eluemunor situation. So all of those guys that are under Joe Shane who have these titles, I think they're actually much more important than maybe we realize in terms of landing the contracts and the free agents that come in here and then we all talk about.
Yeah. And I thought with regards to that, it was interesting to see his role in it. And we'll probably get more of that, Nick, as we get to the draft. I'm sure there's going to be another big player that we're not thinking of who plays a role in that, though that could be more focused on Shane. I'll be interested to see how that plays out because it looks like we're going to get a lot based on the preview. But one thing I thought was interesting was the Giants had a big 6 free agents. They had a top 6 free agents on their priority list. And some of those we expected, Brian Burns, Eluemunor, John Runyan, all signed, Devin Singletary, all signed. They ended up signing 4 of their 6 priorities. The 2 they didn't sign, one, Robert Hunt, you said signed with the Panthers. He just signed for too much. We talked about that. We loved Hunt going to free agency, but we also said he was going to sign for the mega deal. He was going to set that market in a guard. And I told you at the time, Nick, and I stand by it, I'm personally happy and fine we didn't sign Hunt. I don't like going for the top of the market offensive lineman unless it's a difference maker like Joe Thuney when he hit the market, and there's been other guys like Thuney at the market. I personally find Hunt to be a clear tier and level below the Joe Thuney types in the NFL. I don't want to pay new market reset to that type of player. If you get the Thuney, fine. Otherwise, no for me. The other one, though, and are you agree on that? Would you have preferred the 2 guards over Thuney that we got? I mean, over Robert Hunt. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Over Thuney, I was like, well, I would have to go back.
No.
I think I would
Thuney. If we get Thuney, I'll give up both Eluemunor and Runyan right now.
Yeah, no, I would definitely prefer. I think what the Giants did on the offensive line, like that's what we should have expected with this offensive line group. I would much prefer those 2 to Robert Hunt. And to your point, I like Robert Hunt from the little bit of film that I have seen of Robert Hunt. And I think he is a better player than John Runyan slightly, but I would prefer the combination of Runyan and Eluemunor 100%.
Sure. And then the other thing was the 6th guy, Tyrod Taylor. He was a priority for the Giants to re-sign. They asked Brian Daboll, what do you want to do at quarterback? Obviously, backup quarterback was important to them at the time. And Brian Daboll said, I want to re-sign Tyrod Taylor. He said, that'll give us the continuity and bring back the same quarterback room as last year. And to which Joe Schoen replied, Nick, for now.
For now.
Very interesting comment by Joe Schoen there. Brian Daboll says it'll bring us the same quarterback rooms last year for now from Joe Schoen. What do you think that means?
I don't know. What do you think that could mean? Who knows?
They were probably just going to sign trying to trade for a quarterback, like literally everyone reported, including Ian Rappaport and Mike Garafolo. But yes,
you think? I thought they were just going to sign Drew Lock or Sam Darnold or Gardner.
Well, eventually they did break down the price points too, Nick, which I thought was cool. They put up DeAndre. Sorry, did you want to say something? I didn't want to.
No, I was just going to say the poker editing.
Oh, trust me, I have that in my notes.
Full 3.9 inches for Dan Schneider.
No, the opposite. I'll
really?
Yeah, really poor poker references by Hard Knocks. Just a total misunderstanding of the game of Hold'em, which I'll get to.
You're being the stickler right now.
If you're gonna use a Hold'em, if you're gonna go Hold'em, you better have the references down, the reference points down. But on this note, and we'll get back to that. We'll circle back to that nonsense. But on this note, we saw a lot of interesting things. We saw They gave that offer early to Tyrod Taylor. He was one of the first contracts they offered in free agency as one of their big 6 priority re-signs, but it wasn't a huge offer. Clearly, it wasn't as much as the Jets offer, because when the Jets did ultimately sign Tyrod Taylor, Joe Schoen said, and this is deeper into free agency at that point, Nick. So they'd already signed Runyan and all these guys. And maybe if they hadn't signed some of those players and some of those deals fell through, they would have had more money to allocate to backup quarterback, and they would have eventually matched the Jets deal or upped it for Tyrod. But at the time, he's like, look, we just didn't want to do it based on the injuries and the guarantees in the contract. That was the decision to not go Tyrod, in which he said, earlier, the guys he outlined is, if we don't go Tyrod, he said, if we don't go Tyrod, we might go Gardner. He said, Gardner's probably going to cost too much. And he was right about that. And Gardner Minshew. And then if not, we go Darnold or Drew Lock. So ultimately they ended up going Lock instead of Darnold.
I want to say Darnold got more than Lock too.
He definitely did. I feel like from the Vikings.
Yeah. I don't have it off the top of my head. I think it was around 10. Yeah. It's 1 to 10. Lock got 1 to 5.
And part of that is what Joe Schoen said. He said it's the timing. He's like, look, we lucked out because by the time we started negotiating with Drew Lock, we didn't have any money left in free agency. We had spent it. So his agent can't really push us that hard. It's basically, do you want to be here or not? Because we got X amount to spend in free agency at the quarterback position right now, backup quarterback. And that's it. There's no negotiating really, which helped the Giants in the end.
I really hated when Joe Schoen, when he was talking about John Runyan, said, oh, he hasn't missed a game in 3 years. Ronnie talking to the Ronnie Barnes, and I'm just like, why would you say that, Joe Schoen? Like, what is wrong with you, man? But he's right, man. Like he's been a pinnacle, John Runyan, of durability, and hopefully he can protect the quarterback room now that it doesn't have that type of continuity that they wanted. But I mean, Tyrod Taylor, look, he might have, I don't know, man. Like he might have a good opportunity to play if something happens to Aaron Rodgers over there with the New York Jets. And I mean, he has an opportunity. He would have had an opportunity to play here though, too. So it is what it is. The more money taken.
It is what it is. And it might've made things complicated if he did resign, as far as, if Jones is slow. It seems like Jones is going to be ready for the start of training camp at this point. And that's speculation, but it's based on Daniel Jones' recent interview with, if you guys want to check it out, with Matt Sims and Phil Sims. and we seems complete. And he talks about he expects to be ready for the first day of training camp. So that's a good sign. But otherwise, it might have given Tyrod a chance to maybe even compete for QB1. I don't know, Nick, but I did think it was interesting to see them break down like each position one by one and what they want to spend. Like running back, the other guy in the mix, it sounded like, and we heard some names earlier in the first episode, but now that we got to the nuts and bolts of it, it sounded like it was either going to be Singletary or DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, that was
obviously like the tape they saw of Swift against the Giants last year.
That's very interesting because we heard in the first couple episodes how much a priority this coaching staff puts on decisiveness. And then they're into DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift is not really a decisive runner. He is an incredible athlete who played running back in a good situation last year. But if I remember correctly, DeAndre Swift signed to Chicago like immediately. He was the first free agent to fall off the board. And then I think after that, it was like, if we don't get Saquon, we're going motor, because Dable seemed to be all in on motor Singletary.
Yeah, and that was something Dable wanted to get done. It seemed like Dable got a lot of the guys he wanted, honestly, out of this free agency. And I like to see that he was much more involved in this process than we had seen in some of the earlier episodes.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I expected. Joe Schoen and Brian Dable have a great relationship, and they're really good friends, as is Dan Morgan and Joe Schoen, as we've seen throughout this. And it was so funny how Dan Morgan tried squeezing him for a 7th round pick.
Yeah, well, that was the best. That Joe Schoen was whining about not getting nickel and dimed by Dan Morgan. He's like, hopefully we have a long time in this business. Don't nickel and dime me for the extra 7. Though he did kind of say like, you're either going to get 39 and nothing or 47 and something else. But it ended up ultimately being 39 and some other things that the Giants had to put in there, which Joe Schoen admitted or agreed. And there's always going to be some like back and forth in any kind of trade discussion, Nick. So I'm not knocking Shane for this, but he's like, yeah, we met some of your demands. He said to Morgan, but just don't nickel and dime me for the end of this thing.
Yeah, that makes sense too. He's like, you got to have allies, I think is what he said. He's like, you guys would be picking 1st and we're picking 6th. Both of our teams suck. All right. We kind of need, I think he said something like, we need that pick too. We need guys as well. So those draft picks are still very valuable, even if they are in the 7th round.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Joe Schoen also, a few other notes I see that I was thinking about. Joe Schoen did also mention Joe Flacco when he was talking about like the range for the backup quarterbacks. I wonder if the Giants had considered at all giving him a call. And I don't know necessarily if this is the situation Flacco would have wanted to join. But I was curious about that Flacco mention. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting as well. And I think Flacco kind of proved that, hey, you don't need to be, I guess, maybe as desperate at backup quarterback, because he came in off the streets and was a more than competent quarterback for the playoff Cleveland Browns last year. Now I think he signed with the Indianapolis Colts. But I did find it interesting because right after he said that about Flacco, he went on to Locke. And he's like, Locke will cost like $4 million a year. They got him at $5 million. But it's like, we're going to have to pry him away from Seattle. But our selling points is Daniel Jones and his extensive injury history. They didn't say that in so many words, but they alluded to it. And also Trubisky's contract and Tyrod's contract. Both of those players getting contracts after being coached under Brian Dable. And that more than likely healed to Drew Lock.
I like that point. Yeah, that was interesting. I don't know if I even caught that on the first go around, Nick. So I definitely like that. And that's something you can sell. And, the Giants are always looking for ways to sell these free agents. It's like a back and forth there too,
They're salesmen, Dan, not to cut you off, but remember last year or last episode, I should say, with Saquon Barkley, they were trying to sell like, oh, you want to be the Ring of Honor? Don't you want to be the Ring of Honor? Like they're trying to find a way to appeal to the players.
They do. And I thought you put some great notes in about just the discussion about, making that decision. They talked to Shane Bowen and they were like, look, if we go out and we get Brian Burns for you, that's it, buddy. That's all the money we got. That's your only piece we're giving you on the defense side of the ball. Is that worth it to you? And in his mind, it was Shane Bowen. He felt like he's going to get as he said, he's going to get a lot of snaps out of Brian Burns. He doesn't have to take him off the field. He views him as a two-way player. And then, you got insight from other guys in the Giants organization. Brandon Brown had a great point. He says, rarely do young, good character pass rushers hit the market. Tim McDonald said, this guy has more sacks, Brian Burns, than a lot of those in his draft class that have already been paid. And all of those kind of went in, I thought, Nick, to the decision in the end, ultimately, for Joe Schoen to meet, in his words, some of Dan Morgan, Panthers general manager's demands.
When you also look at the Carolina Panthers, and I don't think Dan Morgan was the general manager, but it was 2 years ago where the Rams offered 2 first-round picks for Brian Burns. You're still getting this player at a discount, even though you had to pay him. And as Shane Bowen, I believe it was, said, it's going to play a ton of snaps. Like he's going to play his ass off. So you expect him out there, which I expected anyways, on first down. Let's hope he's not too much of a run liability. He's more of a, I'm going to try to get around you than I'm going to stand up at the point of attack type of player, but he's stronger than he looks. Like I'll give him that much. Like he has some power rush moves as well. And I'm excited that he's going to play next to Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeaux. And in this episode, they even brought up like, look, I think the addition of Brian Burns is going to maximize and get the most out of Dexter Lawrence and Kayvon Thibodeaux.
I'm with you on that, Nick. And ultimately, it puts a big, in my mind at least, it puts a big bow tie on the whole entire idea of, look, what was our thoughts with what we need to do this offseason? We need to protect the quarterback. They allocated resources to the offensive line with 2 key signings they wanted. They took resources out of a flashy playmaker like Saquon Barkley to protect the offensive line. And the other thing was, 1, protect the quarterback, 2, get after the quarterback. Yep. Xavier McKinney, who was barely featured at all in this series and kind of seems like the Giants were just totally out on that. That's my vibe, at least from this episode and prior episodes, wasn't going to help them get after the quarterback. But Brian Burns was. And that's what Shane Bowen wanted too. So they really did a lot, man. Like it may not work again, Nick, and the Giants may not improve on the tough seasons we've had the last 5 years. But man, their objective was to protect the quarterback and get after the quarterback. They did a whole shit ton of work and put so many resources into doing those 2 things. Hopefully it shows up already right away in year 1.
Joe Shane was very surprised when he saw the Xavier McKinney contract. He was like, oh, geez, like $17 million. That puts him at what? $17 million a year? It was like 4 for
second
60.
highest paid safety.
Yeah. And then there's no shot the Giants. And I think they liked Xavier McKinney, but once that number started getting floated out there, it was a done deal. And like you said earlier, man, this is all you're getting is Brian Burns, but that can be a transcendent piece for this defense, specifically this defense and this defensive coordinator, if again the Giants can stay competitive and get into passing situations.
Right. And that's something that we've talked about for a long damn time, and we'll see if it can happen. Did we miss anything else in this episode before touching a little bit on the preview of next episode?
If anybody has any super chats, I actually want to say, please send them in and we'll answer whatever questions you guys have. I think we hit on just about everything with this specific episode. It wasn't the most exciting episode, I would say, even though we got a little bit of Joe Shane and Brian Dable listening to Beyonce as they go over free agent additions, possible free agent additions. But damn, next episode, I'm hoping it actually is as exciting as it's built up to be, because it seems like there's some really cool nuggets in there.
If the preview is not just, a, thing to hype up people to get from HBO to get people to watch the show, next episode could be unbelievably crazy. Like they may show the full trade talks to get to number 3 with the Patriots or whoever else they might have been talking to. I think it was only the Patriots. I think Washington was definitely out on it, on trading back with the Giants, and the Bears were taking Caleb Williams. But those full trade talks with the Patriots, because in that one forced 60-second preview, we heard Brian Dable say, they asked Brian Dable, would you trade up for Jaden Daniels, who we didn't even really, hear that much of. He said, yes, I would trade up for Jaden Daniels. Then Mara is referencing like a deal, which was clearly to trade up for a quarterback. He's like, I'm going to have heart palpitations if we pull this deal off. And then Joe Shane's like, if we don't land a quarterback, which would have to be via trade up, we'll roll with Daniel and draft the best player for him. All 3 of those things were in the preview.
And in the preview, it opened up with Malik Neighbors, I think, at his pro day catching passes, and Joe Shane or Brian Dable, saying like, Malik Neighbors has a little dog on him. He's so good. Like they love the Malik Neighbors. Like, I think he's going to be there at 6. He might be there at 6. He might not. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but we know for sure that Brian Dable loves Malik Neighbors. We've got so much content on that already. I think it's pretty clear. Go ahead.
Something else I want to bring up before we get out of here, if we're done with this episode, and it's just some Giants news, and that's Theo Johnson getting placed on the physically unable to perform list. I'm hoping this is some sort, and I haven't done any research into this. I don't know exactly what's going on. I don't think any injury was reported. I'm hoping it's some sort of like transactional move. I don't know exactly why that would happen right now. It's not typically a time where those things happen, but what's your beat on this, Dan?
Yeah, we don't have much on that. I'll say this. My beat on this is they're more prepared than they typically are for this type of thing. With the reasoning, at least from my mind, being I am cautiously, I don't want to use this word again. I'm just going to say I'm excited. I think I watched a little bit when they signed him, and then we talked about him on a couple episodes ago, and I went back and I just looked at TrueMeat. I looked at my service. I don't want to give it away, and for where I can get my film. And I kind of like the movement skills from Jack Stahl. I think if Jack Stahl gets on the field, like the Eagles didn't need him, they didn't use him. I think if he gets on the field, he's going to be more of a receiving option than people realize, in addition to being a blocker. So if I got Belly and Stahl, it's and Manhurst to play the role that we expect for the start of camp until Theo Johnson gets back, and I guess Lawrence Cager as well, I'm good, because you know what? I want this team to live in 11 personnel anyway. I don't want to. I have too many receivers that I want on the field to be running that much 12 anyway. I want to see Daniel Jones operate an 11 personnel offense with those three receivers, the top three receivers, or rotation of that wide receiver 3 on the field for as many snaps. So I feel pretty good. I'm not like too scared off by this.
I know it's a hip injury is what Runyan reported but I'm just not sure like the extent of it or how it happened, if it's just something minor or whatnot. Hopefully he can get into camp, because I think those snaps in training camp are still valuable, incredibly valuable for a rookie to just learn the tricks of the trade of playing. We have a super here from Cliffside. Cliffside, thank you so much for the donation. What do you think of Dable emphasizing interior offensive line? I would say, Cliffside, Dable has eyes, and he's seen how bad the New York Giants interior offensive line has been, probably for like the last decade, but specifically over the last 2 years. And I believe it was summed up by Joe Shane, I think it was, in the episode, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier on this podcast. It was, you protect the quarterback and you rush the passer. And protecting the quarterback, look, Daniel Jones has faced a lot of interior pressure with Mark Lewinsky and JMS last year, and whoever they had at guard. It was just a nightmare for a quarterback. And I think fixing that situation had to be at the forefront of Brian Dable's mind. And I'm glad they did that with at least 2 competent, possibly 3, including Aaron Stinney, 3 competent veteran guards.
Yeah, I think this was the point of priority for me too. Like, you can't win in the NFL without pocket integrity on the interior, and the Giants simply didn't have that last year. Too many revolving doors at guard. JMS himself got injured. This was more important to me in a lot of ways than anything else, because tackle, we just have to hope for the best there. And now they even have a backup option, right? As they mentioned in this episode, if things go wrong with Evan, Eluemunor can play right tackle. But guard, man, that interior offensive line needed to be shored up.
So Mark Thompson, longtime listener, thank you, Mark. Said he is on the active PUP, so he is still a part of the 90-man roster. So it's probably just a minor injury at this point.
Yeah, I didn't think the Theo thing was going to be that serious. I'm happy to hear that, though.
Yeah, just hopefully it's not something that like lingers throughout camp and affects him, because I mean we need these young players to get as much practice as they can. I mean, dude, not long ago there were 2-a-days where these young players were able to, they work their ass off, but they were able to learn a bunch, and that's.
And I don't think injuries were up or anything. Like, I know the NFLPA argued against it to take it away for, the idea of putting the players through more and injuries, and they'll never be able to reinstate it at this point. That's it. Now that these players are used to not having to do 2-a-days, I can guarantee you they'll never agree to do those again. But I almost feel like it trained them, their muscles, and maybe help them sustain not get injured, because I feel like injuries are only up in the NFL.
It does seem that way, but
by the way, that was based on no scientific evidence. I don't have any data or anything to prove that injuries are up. Just a feeling, just a gut feeling that we're getting more injuries these days.
All right, Dan, let me put you on a spot here.
All right.
3 episodes into Hard Knocks, and people in the chat, please send in your opinions of this. What is the most interesting part of Hard Knocks so far for you?
For me, it was this free agent process. I thought that, the quarterback interview was the one for me before this, but this was way more interesting. I thought that was a riveting 12 minutes of TV right there, when they were giving every position, breaking it down, the options, the price points, and that top 6 priority list that we went over. So I definitely thought that was my favorite part.
I think so too. Yeah, I think so too. It wasn't the Schmuckers. It wasn't the Schmuckers. It wasn't the St. Elmo.
David Worthy's 40 time that they spent 5 minutes.
Dude, yeah, they spent like 6. They're like, yo, we just need to burn this because we don't want to give any more information. Yeah, no. I thought the graphics in this episode was cool. I just think the whole thing is cool. Just seeing like the behind the scenes and the little conversations between Joe Shane and Brian Dable and all of the other like ancillary pieces, where I don't really exactly know like what a football operations guy does, like I can think about it and be like, yeah, he probably does this, but it was cool to see like Ed Triggs actually have a real huge responsibility reaching out to a primary free agent and then landing him, and he be the lead basically on that, under obviously the guidance of Joe Shane. But we got a super chat here too from Mr. Bob Imberman. Thank you so much, Bob. Thank you so much. He says, Nikki no carbs and Danny no sweets. I appreciate you guys.
No
Have a beer.
sweats. No sweats.
Sweats.
I don't really know the no sweat reference. I don't know what that's in reference.
You swear. We'll address that after we're done. I appreciate you guys. Have a beer on me and keep up the great work. Bob, I appreciate you. Yeah, Dan, are you a sweaty guy?
I don't really sweat that much.
Maybe that's where
I'm
it's
just a
from.
normal person. Maybe that's what it's. I don't know how he would know that. I don't know how Bob would
You
have
probably mentioned it at some point.
Potentially. Though I have been sweating more lately. I don't know. I'm not like it depends. Like this heat, it's hard to judge. Obviously, I've played some golf in this heat, so it's an easy to sweat playing golf. And there's the golf reference. I had to get one in. It's been a while. But don't worry, I'm not referencing too much on that front. But yeah, I guess I don't sweat. But I know you don't eat carbs, so we know they definitely got one locked in there.
That's ridiculous. I have some. They're okay. They're okay.
Occasionally, you'll have one.
All righty, Dan. Do we have anything else to go over here on this episode?
No, I think that's it for now. Keep it locked and loaded. Training camp's on the way, and we're going to have some more positional previews and maybe some other content coming as well that we'll come through with. So thanks again for everybody who supports us always. Have a great rest of your night, and we'll talk to you soon.